October 14th, 1943. 28,000 feet above Germany, where the air is cold enough to kill. 291 B-17 flying fortresses thunder eastward toward Schweinfurt.
Please,
Inside
God,
each bomber,
get us
10
home
men
safely.
breathe oxygen and pray
Give us
their
strength for
mission.
the mission ahead.
Destroy the
Lord,
ball-bearing
hear our
factories that keep the
prayers.
German war machine running. Flying beside them, Silver Guardians with 8 machine guns each. The P-47 Thunderbolts hold formation. The bomber crews feel safer with them there. Something is wrong. In every P-47 cockpit, fuel gauges fall toward red. Physics is screaming a simple message. Turn back now, already trying to get home. At the German border, the fighters peel away. Not because they want to, because their tanks are empty. The bombers watch their protectors disappear. Then they fly on into Germany, alone. What happens next will be called Black Thursday. 60 bombers lost, 600 men gone. The day the doctrine died. But here's what makes this unbearable. The technology to prevent this massacre had existed for 20 years. The P-47 seconds flying home, they were built with fittings to carry external fuel tanks. Everything they needed was already on the aircraft, except permission. This is not a story about invention. This is a story about the deadliest word in military history. No, let me show you what no costs. Black Thursday, October 14th, 1943. 60 B-17 flying fortresses shot down, burning, spinning, falling 28,000 feet into German soil. 600 American airmen killed or captured in a single day. Boys who ate breakfast in England and never saw sunset. Another 17 bombers so badly shredded by bullets and shrapnel they'd never fly again, limped home, scrapped to parts. The mathematics of slaughter. 26% loss rate. Think about that. If you climbed into a B-17 that morning, you had better odds of dying than rolling a 1 on a 6-sided die. But Black Thursday wasn't an aberration. It was a pattern. In the first 9 months of strategic bombing over Germany, before long-range fighter escorts were finally authorized, the 8th Air Force bled. 25,000 American aircrew killed or captured. 2,500 heavy bombers destroyed. 25,000 men not lost to superior German technology, not sacrificed in some unavoidable tragedy of war. Lost because the technology to protect them existed, and someone said no. Lieutenant Colonel Bernie Flew was an observer on Black Thursday. He watched it happen. He wrote this in his mission report. They came in from 12 o'clock level, firing as they closed. When they passed, more fighters attacked from 6 o'clock. Without escort, we were helpless. I watched B-17 seconds explode, break apart, spin down trailing fire. I counted 23 parachutes. Over 100 men didn't make it out. 100 men in the bombers you could see in one mission on one day. And this happened again, and again, and again. Because someone, somewhere, kept saying no. The problem was brutally simple. American bombers, B-17 flying fortresses, B-24 Liberators could reach deep into Germany. 600 miles from England to Berlin, their fuel tanks were massive, their range sufficient. American fighters, P-47 Thunderbolts, the most powerful interceptors in the sky, could protect them. 850 caliber machine guns per aircraft. Armor plating, speed, skill, but not at the same time. The P-47 Thunderbolt. 7 tons of muscle and firepower. Internal fuel capacity, 305 gallons. Combat radius on internal fuel, 230 miles. The German border sits 200 miles from English airfields. Berlin, the heart of Nazi Germany, the target everyone wanted to hit, sits 600 miles away. The gap between where American fighters turned back and where German fighters waited? 375 miles of unprotected sky. 375 miles where bomber crews flew alone. Where Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs hunted freely. Where every mission became a gauntlet of fire. This was the killing zone. And here's what makes the deaths of those 25,000 men so unforgivable. Everyone knew
This
the
modification
solution.
is essential if
Not
we hope
some
to maintain
classified
air
secret locked in a
superiority.
lab.
We
Not
implement
some
the external
theoretical
fuel
concept
tanks in
waiting
Stress
to be
point on this
proven.
fitting is too weak.
Not some impossible engineering
We'll
challenge.
reinforce it now.
Everyone knew the solution. The engineers at Wright Field knew it. The pilots climbing into cockpits knew it. The generals planning missions knew it. Even the Germans hunting American bombers knew it. External fuel tanks, drop tanks. Hang them under the wings. Fill them with fuel. Fly the extra miles. Drop them when empty, or when combat begins. Simple, proven, effective, and available. So why weren't they using it?
The
Here's what's
structural
going to make you
integrity of
angry.
these seams is unacceptable.
External fuel tanks, drop tanks,
Then these
auxiliary
fuel
pods,
pods are...
whatever you want to call them. They weren't some revolutionary breakthrough waiting to be discovered. They weren't cutting-edge technology requiring years of research and development. March 5th, 1923, Selfridge Field, Michigan, 20 years before Black Thursday. The 1st Pursuit Group of the United States Army Air Service took off in Boeing MB-3 Amphiers fighters, sleek biplanes. The best America had, and hanging beneath each fuselage mounted on the bomb rack centerline, a 37-gallon external fuel tank. 20 years before Black Thursday, 2 decades before those 600 men fell from German skies. 1936, Spanish Civil War. Both sides used drop tanks extensively. Fighter range doubles overnight. 1937. Japan introduces the Mitsubishi A-6M0. Specification requirement. Endurance with drop tanks of 6 to 8 hours. They make it standard equipment from day one.
Secure the aft coupling.
1939. Germany's Luftwaffe
Tightening the main strap
begins
now.
war with drop tanks already in mass production. 300-liter tanks for Messerschmitt,
Power coming up on the
109
inboard.
seconds, and
Signal the
Stukas,
tower, we are ready
Operating
to taxi.
1943, 6 months before Black Thursday. 16. American P-38 Lightning Fighters take off from Guadalcanal. Their mission: intercept Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor. Over Bougainville. Distance 1,000. Impossible range for a fighter, except each P-38 carries 2 drop tanks, 165 gallons under one wing, 330 gallons under the other. They fly the mission. They shoot down Yamamoto. They all come home. The longest fighter intercept mission in aviation history. Made possible by drop tanks. So let me ask you the question that military historians have been asking for 80 years. If drop tanks worked in 1923, if they worked for Japan, if they worked for Germany, if American fighters used them successfully in the Pacific 6 months before Black Thursday, why the hell weren't they being used over Europe? Why were 25,000 men dying in a killing zone that could have been closed? Why were P-47 Thunderbolts flying home with empty wing hardpoints, specifically designed to carry drop tanks while bombers burned? The technology existed. The infrastructure existed. The proof of concept existed. What didn't exist? Permission. The answer requires understanding the most powerful force in military history. Not firepower, not technology, not even courage. Doctrine. In the 1930s, a group of United States Army Air Corps officers gathered at Maxwell Field, Alabama. They had a vision, a theory, a belief that would reshape warfare itself. They called it strategic bombing. History would call them the Bomber Mafia. General Henry Hap Arnold, General Ira Eaker, General Carl Spaatz. Brilliant men. West Point graduates. Decorated veterans. Patriots who dedicated their lives to American air power. And they were absolutely convinced of one revolutionary idea. The bomber will always get through. Their doctrine was elegant, seductive, almost beautiful in its logic. Heavy bombers, flying in tight formations, bristling with .50 caliber machine guns, could defend themselves through concentrated defensive firepower. They could strike industrial targets deep in enemy territory. They could win wars without grinding through trenches. Fighter
Respectfully,
escorts,
Colonel, but
that
the
was
current
admitting the
bombing
theory might be
doctrine
wrong,
relies too
and these
heavily
men
on
had spent
daylight
their
precision.
entire careers, decades of study,
losses are
teaching,
unsustainable.
planning, building this doctrine. May 16th, 1939. 4 years before Black Thursday, General Hap Arnold, Chief of the Air Corps, issues a memorandum. External fuel tanks pose unacceptable safety concerns. The use of drop tanks on all United States fighter aircraft and light bombers is hereby prohibited. There it is, the memo that would kill 25,000 men. Not because drop tanks didn't work, we know they worked. Not because they couldn't be made safe 20 years of use proved they could. But because using them would mean admitting that bombers needed fighter escorts. And admitting that would mean the doctrine their life's work, their professional legacy was wrong. Now, to be fair to these men, they had reasons beyond ego. Drop tanks did add drag, reducing fighter speed by 15 to 20%. They were vulnerable to enemy fire. One tracer round could ignite them. They occupied external hardpoints that could carry bombs or rockets. These weren't stupid men making stupid arguments. They were smart men, dedicated officers, defending a theory they'd spent decades developing. They genuinely believed bombers could defend themselves. They genuinely believed strategic bombing would shorten wars and save lives. But somewhere over Germany, in that 375-mile killing zone, theories were meeting reality. And reality didn't care about doctrine. Reality didn't care about careers or theories or elegant strategic visions. Reality was killing American boys, 60 at a time, and doctrine kept saying no. While bomber crews were dying over Germany, another battle was being fought. A quieter battle, no explosions, no machine guns, no parachutes falling from burning aircraft. Just memos, proposals, rejections. But this battle would matter just as much. Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Kelsey, not a mechanic, not some scrappy underdog tinkering in a hangar after hours. An MIT-educated aeronautical engineer with a master's degree. A test pilot who'd flown everything from experimental prototypes to combat aircraft. Fighter project officer at Wright Field, the man responsible for evaluating every pursuit aircraft in the Air Corps. November 1941. 2 years before Black Thursday. Over a year before America even entered the war. Kelsey picked up the phone and called Lockheed Aircraft in California. His request: design external fuel tanks for the P-38 Lightning fighter. Lockheed's chief engineer, the legendary Kelly Johnson. Sure, we can have prototypes ready in 6 weeks. Kelsey's superiors at Wright Field: absolutely not. Air Corps policy prohibits drop tanks. Request denied. Kelsey pushed back. Submitted reports. Cited the successful 1923 tests. Pointed to German and Japanese use. Denied. Johnson wanted to include drop tank mounting brackets in the P-38's factory-designed standard equipment, built into every aircraft from the start. Headquarters. Vetoed. Meanwhile, Republic Aviation was building the P-47 Thunderbolt. And here's where the absurdity becomes almost unbearable. The British had ordered P-47 seconds.
The
British
tolerances
doctrine,
on this
unlike
fitting
American
seem off.
doctrine,
Yes,
recognized that
slightly
fighters
misaligned.
needed extended
We need to
range.
adjust the jig before
So
the next
British
run.
contracts required drop tank fittings to be installed at the factory. Republic couldn't run 2 different production lines. Too expensive, too complicated. So
Check
they
those
built
bolts
all
on the fuselage
P-47
connections,
seconds,
son.
including
We can't
those
afford any
destined for
failures
American
overseas.
squadrons
Already done,
with drop
sir.
tank
Moving to the
fittings
next one
already
now.
installed. The brackets were there. The fuel lines were there. The release mechanisms were there. Every single component necessary to extend the P-47's range was built into the aircraft. American generals, you are not authorized to use them. So here's the absurdity that should make your blood boil. By late 1942, American fighters sitting on English airfields had the mounting brackets for drop tanks. The tanks themselves were being manufactured in British factories. American pilots
These
were
drop
begging,
tanks are useless if we
literally
can't
begging
jettison
their
them properly.
commanders for more
We need the
range
range,
to
sir.
protect the
We
bombers.
can't leave the bombers unprotected.
Everything they needed to save lives was sitting right there. Everything except 3 words from headquarters. You are authorized. But Air Corps policy said no, and doctrine doesn't bend, even when men are dying. October 14th, 1943. 0500 hours. Across East Anglia, England, bomber crews wake to the sound of rain on Nissen hut roofs. 291 B-17 Flying Fortresses will take off this morning. Target: Schweinfurt, ball-bearing factories, 400 miles inside Germany. Each bomber carries 10 men, 2,910 men total. Staff Sergeant Joseph Connolly, Waist Gunner, 91st Bomb Group. This is his 10th mission. 9 more, and he goes home. He's 22 years old. Captain Robert Rosenthal, pilot, 100th Bomb Group, already known as the Bloody 100th for their losses. He writes letters to his wife before every mission. He's 24. Lieutenant James McLaughlin, navigator, 91st Bomb Group, graduated MIT 6 months ago. His job is to guide his crew to the target and back. He's 20 years old. Most of them are between 19 and 25. Boys, really. Boys with a mission. By 0800, 291 bombers are airborne. Silver fortresses climbing into grey English sky. The P-47 Thunderbolts join them over the channel. Guardian angels in aluminum and paint. For the first 200 miles, the bomber crews feel safe. The Thunderbolts weave above and beside them. Vigilant, protective. Then they reach the German border, and the fighters turn back. The bomber crews watch them go. Watch the sky empty of protection. Watch the gap widen. Then they fly on, into Germany. Alone. What happens next, German pilots will later describe as a turkey shoot. Messerschmitt 109 seconds, Focke-Wulf 190 seconds. Scores of them attack in coordinated waves. Head-on attacks at closing speeds of 600 miles per hour, trying to kill the pilots and break formations. Diving attacks from above, targeting engines and fuel tanks. Sustained attacks on individual bombers until they fall. German pilots know the Americans are unescorted. They press home their attacks without fear, without mercy. A bomber pilot, later. You could see them lining up miles away. Little silver specks, becoming larger. You knew they were coming. You knew you couldn't do anything about it. You just waited. A navigator. I watched a B-17 off our right wing take a direct hit to the number 3 engine. It exploded. The whole wing folded upward like paper. The plane rolled inverted and started spinning. I counted the parachutes. 9 men were aboard. I saw 3 chutes open. Of 291 bombers that started the mission, 60 shot down. 600 men in those aircraft. 17
Black hit
damaged
the hydraulics
beyond
line right
repair.
here, Captain. We're losing
Scrapped
fluid fast.
After landing,
Main spar is compromised.
121 with battle damage. Over 600 men killed, wounded, or missing. In one day. In one mission. That night, staff officers at 8th Air Force Headquarters gather around tables covered in loss reports. They calculate the mathematics of extinction. At 26% loss rates, 1 in 4 bombers destroyed per mission. They would be out of aircraft in 4 to 5 months. The strategic bombing campaign, the cornerstone of American air doctrine, was on the verge of collapse. Not because German industry was too strong, not because Luftwaffe pilots were too skilled, but because American doctrine had put bombers in places where American fighters that could have protected them weren't allowed to go. Because somewhere in Washington, someone had said no to drop tanks, and 60 bombers fell because of it. October 15th, 1943. The morning after, General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force, sat at his desk surrounded by casualty reports. 60 bombers lost, 600 men gone. Another 17 aircraft destroyed beyond repair. He picked up a pen and wrote a cable to Washington. Without long-range fighter escort, strategic bombing campaign cannot continue. Current situation untenable. Require immediate solution.
We have
untenable.
confirmation on the launch sequence.
Military
Get me
language for
STRATCOM immediately.
we are
Zulu
losing
time is
this
now.
war.
All units are a go.
The cable
Repeat,
arrived
a
at the
go.
Pentagon like a bomb.
We need fuselages for
Within
the Marauders
hours,
by
phones were
1600
ringing
hours.
at Wright
Confirm
Field,
immediately.
at Air Corps
Schematic
headquarters,
revisions are
at
approved.
aircraft
Send them
manufacturers
to the
across the
floor.
country.
They've
The same
shifted the
question
convoy route here,
echoed in
Sector
every
Charlie.
office,
Then
every
we divert the
conference
main
room,
bomber
every
wing
urgent
immediately.
meeting.
We
Why
cannot
can't
let
our
this window
fighters
close.
escort bombers deep into Germany?
As
And
of
slowly,
0400
too slowly,
hours, the
far
threat
too
level has
slowly,
been
people
elevated to
started saying
critical.
the quiet part
We
out
have credible
loud.
intelligence.
Actually, an engineer at Wright Field ventured. They can. What do you mean they can? Drop tanks, external fuel tanks. We've known about them since the 20s. The P-47 seconds. They're already equipped with the mounting brackets. Someone pulled out specifications for the P-47 Thunderbolt. There. Page 47. Drop tank mounting points. Fuel line connections. Release mechanisms. Standard equipment. Built into every aircraft. Why aren't we using them? Silence. Then someone found the memo. May 16th,
This changes everything.
1939.
We
General
have to move
Arnold's
now.
prohibition on drop tanks.
They look magnificent.
Can we rescind this? Meanwhile,
With these,
North American
we stand
P-51
a
Mustangs
chance.
were arriving from the States. Brand new, sleek, powerful, and designed from the drawing board to carry drop tanks. The brackets were there, the plumbing was there, the engineering was done. The technology, proven. 20 years. Used successfully by Germany, Japan, Britain. Used by American fighters in the Pacific.
From the
infrastructure
Pacific to Europe, this
already
proven
built into the
technology
aircraft.
extended their reach,
The
ensuring
tanks
air
themselves,
superiority when it mattered
British
most.
factories were already manufacturing them by the thousands. Everything necessary to close the killing zone was sitting in warehouses, installed on aircraft proven in combat. All it needed was 3 words from headquarters. You are authorized. 3 words that would have saved 60 bombers on Black Thursday. 3 words that would have saved 600 men. 3 words that could have been spoken in 1941 when Kelsey first requested them. 3 words that could have been spoken in 1942 when the losses started mounting. 3 words. But bureaucracy moves slowly, even when people are dying.
This
After Black
structural
Thursday,
weakness here.
the
We
discussions
have to
began.
reroute the convoy
Committees
immediately.
Formed.
But the analysis
Reports
isn't
were
complete.
written.
We
Risk
don't have the luxury of time,
assessments
Doctor.
were conducted. Procurement processes were initiated. The technology that had existed for 20 years needed to go through proper channels.
The
drop tanks
aerodynamic
that had
load
been
is
proven in
significantly
combat
reduced at
needed
this
to be
angle.
properly
But
evaluated.
what about the structural
The
integrity
solution
over the
that everyone
target
knew
zone?
would work
We can't risk
needed
a
to be
failure
officially
there.
authorized. And in the meantime, bombers kept flying into Germany without escorts. Into the killing zone, because the 3 words hadn't been spoken yet. Because doctrine moves slower than death. December 1943. 2 months after Black Thursday. 2 months of committees, reports, assessments. 2 months of more losses, more missions, more men, not coming home. Finally, the order comes. Fighter groups are hereby authorized to utilize external fuel tanks for extended range escort missions, effective immediately. 3 words after 20 years of waiting, after 25,000 casualties, after Benjamin Kelsey spent 2 years pushing, after bomber crews spent months dying.
This is
3
not a
words.
drill. All
The
available
response
personnel,
is immediate.
mobilize now.
At
We're moving to the
Debden,
hangar bay.
at Bodney, at Leiston, at every fighter
All
base
green on the
across East
starboard engine,
Anglia.
Captain.
Ground crews swarm
Roger that.
aircraft
Clear
like
to close the
ants on
canopy.
sugar. Sergeant Donald Marner, of the 357th Fighter Group, rolls a drop tank on a dolly toward a waiting P-51. The tank is painted silver, teardrop-shaped, 108 gallons. It weighs 600 pounds when full. He and his crew chief lift it into position beneath the wing. The mounting bracket, the one that's been there all along, empty and waiting, accepts the tank's lug with a solid click. 4 bolts. Tighten them down. Connect the fuel line to the aircraft system. Check the release mechanism. 15 minutes of work. Across the airfield, the same scene repeats. Tank after tank. Aircraft after aircraft. The technology that had been sitting in warehouses, unused, unwanted, unauthorized, now bolted to wings where it should have been all along. The P-47 Thunderbolt. Previously limited to 230 miles combat radius. Now, with one 108-gallon drop tank, 375 miles. The P-51 Mustang. Sleek, fast, efficient, with two 150-gallon drop tanks, one under each wing. It could reach Berlin and return 600 miles each way, 1,200 miles total. The entire killing zone closed. And just like that, the impossible became routine.
By
But here's
moving the
the irony.
convoy through the Jebel
It should
Gap,
haunt every
we saved
military
3 hours.
planner, every
What's the
bureaucrat,
risk assessment on that
every
route?
person
Minimal
who's ever said we
resistance
can't
expected, sir.
when they meant we won't. Everything necessary to save those 25,000 men had been available the entire time. The brackets built into the aircraft at the factory, the tanks sitting in warehouses since 1942,
Check the
fuel
pressure
lines
differential on auxiliary tank
already
3.
plumbed,
Reading stable at
Ready.
45 psi.
the release
All green here.
mechanisms
Confirming
tested and
systems
proven
check
in
complete from the
1923.
cockpit.
The engineering knowledge? 20 years old. The combat proof? Pacific Theater. April 1943. All of it was there. Every single piece. Every component. Every system. Every technological requirement. The P-47 seconds flying home on Black Thursday with empty wing hardpoints. Those hardpoints were specifically designed, engineered, and installed at the factory to carry drop tanks. The 600 men who died that day flew past warehouses full of unused drop tanks on their way to their aircraft. 15 minutes of installation, 20 years of technology, and 2 years of Kelsey's advocacy. All waiting, all ready, all proven. What was missing? Permission. 3 letters, 10 characters. The difference between
Copy.
life and death
Ground.
for 25,000
Switching to
men.
tactical.
December
Engineering.
13th,
Confirm pressure valve
1943.
sequencing. We are approaching
4
the 0
weeks
mark.
after authorization.
Confirmed. All systems.
4 weeks after those 3
Fuel
words
pressure
finally
check,
came.
Captain.
The ground is
Clear to
frozen.
start.
Ordnance
The air
secure.
tastes of metal and ice. 48 P-51 Mustangs sit on the hardstand, silver drop tanks gleaming beneath their wings like promises. Each Mustang carries 108 gallons of extra fuel, enough to fly another 150 miles beyond where P-47 seconds used to turn back. Target: Kiel, Germany. 280 miles from England. Deep in the Reich, beyond the old killing zone. For the first time in this war, American fighters will penetrate deep into German airspace, not just to the border, not just to the edge, all the way to the target. The bomber crews know it. As they climb into their B-17 seconds, they look at the fighters taxiing alongside them. They see those silver tanks.
The Mustangs are
They
holding the
understand
lead. Will maintain
what it
position and
means.
altitude at 25,000
Protection.
feet.
Real protection. All the way there, all the way back. The flight to Kiel takes 90 minutes. The Mustangs stay with the bombers every mile, past the Dutch coast, past the German border,
number 3.
past the
Reading
point
steady,
where
Captain.
they used to turn
Escort
back.
looks good.
They keep going. In a Luftwaffe control bunker near Hamburg, a German fighter controller stares at his radar scope in disbelief. American fighters appearing over Kiel. At this range? This is not possible. But his radar doesn't lie. The Americans are there. Where they've never been before. Where German doctrine said they couldn't go. A Luftwaffe pilot, interviewed years later, remembers that day. We positioned ourselves 50 kilometers beyond their expected range. Our standard tactic: wait for the escorts to leave, then attack. But they kept coming. The American fighters kept coming. We were not prepared. We were not positioned. For the first time, we were the ones surprised. The engagement lasts 12 minutes. American Mustangs, 11 German fighters destroyed. American losses, 0. But the real victory isn't counted in shot-down Messerschmitts. It's psychological, strategic, existential. German defensive doctrine, the entire Luftwaffe strategy for defending the Reich, was built on one fundamental assumption: American fighters would turn back at the border. That assumption had governed every tactical decision for 18 months. Fighter positioning, interception, timing, resource allocation. On December 13th, 1943, that assumption died. The Mustangs escort the bombers all the way to Kiel. They protect them during the bomb run. They cover the withdrawal. Then they turn west and fly home. Every fighter returns. Every pilot climbs out of his cockpit. Ground crews swarm the aircraft,
Fuel tank secure.
checking the empty
Good.
drop
Let's
tank
get her
mounting
fueled up.
points the tanks jettisoned over Germany when combat began, just as designed.
Smelled like
In the ready
victory
room,
from where
the
I
mission
was.
debriefing is almost giddy. They weren't where they usually are. They weren't ready for us. We owned the sky. One pilot runs his hand over the mounting bracket, now empty. The tank dropped somewhere over the North Sea. 20 years, he says to his crew chief. This tech is 20 years old. Why the hell did it take so long? His crew chief doesn't have an answer. Nobody does. February 20th, 1944. After months of
Guidance
winter
is
weather
stable.
that grounded aircraft across Europe, a high-pressure system finally moves over the continent.
Rudder check.
Clear
right.
skies. Visibility unlimited. General Jimmy Doolittle, who replaced Eaker as 8th Air Force Commander in January, sees his opportunity. He calls it Operation Argument.
We hit the
History,
airfields here,
or call it
then
Big
proceed
Week.
along this.
The targets: aircraft factories across Germany, Messerschmitt plants, Foch, Wolf assembly lines, engine manufacturers, ball-bearing factories that feed them all. The goal: destroy German aircraft production. Break the Luftwaffe's ability to replace losses. The scale: unprecedented. Over 6 days, the 8th Air Force will launch 3,800 bomber sorties, 3,700 fighter sorties, nearly all fighters equipped with drop tanks. This is possible only because of those tanks, only because someone finally said yes. On February 20th, the sky over England fills with aircraft, hundreds of bombers, hundreds of fighters. The drone of engines shakes windows across East Anglia. The difference from 18 months ago is stark, undeniable. Before drop tanks, German fighters attacked bombers with impunity. American fighters watched from the border, unable to help, burning with frustration and fuel gauges reading empty after drop tanks. American fighters hunt German fighters over their own airfields, over their own factories, over their own cities. For 6 days, the air war over Germany becomes total, relentless, inescapable for the Luftwaffe. American fighters don't just escort bombers anymore. They seek out German aircraft. They strafe airfields. They catch German fighters taking off and landing the most vulnerable moments.
It's at 9
By
o'clock.
the end of
Let's
Big
hit that
Week,
hangar.
German fighter losses exceed
Roger.
250
Engaging
aircraft.
ground targets now.
Worse, far worse for the Luftwaffe. Dozens of experienced pilots killed. Men with hundreds of hours of combat. Aces, squadron commanders, instructors. You can build a new Messerschmitt in 6 weeks. You cannot build a new ace in 6 weeks. The kill ratio, 6-1 in favor of the Americans. For every American fighter lost, 6 German aircraft destroyed. Major Johannes Steinhoff, German ace with over 100 victories, writes in his diary, "We are no longer hunters. We have become the hunted. American fighters have fuel to pursue us anywhere, to our bases, to our homes. There is nowhere safe anymore." Albert Speer, Nazi armaments minister, writes in his memoirs years later, "The American success in extending fighter range was catastrophic for Germany. Once their fighters could escort bombers anywhere, our entire defensive strategy collapsed. We could not protect our industry. We could not protect our cities. We could not protect our airmen. Before Big Week, the Luftwaffe controlled the skies over Germany. German fighters chose when and where to engage. After Big Week, the Luftwaffe was fighting for survival. Reactive, defensive, losing. An American pilot in his debriefing. "Today we flew to Brunswick, escorted the bombers in, mixed it up with about 40 Germans over the target, chased 3 of them back to their airfield and caught them landing. Then we escorted the bombers home. Still had fuel to spare when we landed. Still had fuel to spare. Impossible. In October 1943. Routine. In February 1944. The 375-mile killing zone, gone. Closed by technology from 1923, finally authorized in 1943. March 4th, 1944. The mission everyone has been waiting for. The target everyone wants to hit. The city that represents everything Berlin, 600 miles from England. The heart of Nazi Germany. Capital of the Reich. 68 P-51 Mustangs will fly escort. Each carries 2 150-gallon drop tanks, one under each wing, 300 gallons of external fuel, total fuel capacity per aircraft, 569 gallons. Combat radius with drop tanks, 640 miles. Distance to Berlin, 600 miles. Margin for error, 40 miles. Margin for extended combat, none. Captain Don Gentile, already an ace with 10 victories, leads one flight. He's flown every major mission since drop tanks were authorized. He knows what this means. The briefing officer is blunt. Gentlemen, every gallon matters today. Maintain precise cruise speed, lean fuel mixture, no unnecessary maneuvering. If you get into extended combat, you will not make it home. Choose your battles carefully. This is the edge of what's possible. The absolute limit of range. Technology from 1923, pushed to its maximum, finally being used for what it was always meant to do. 68 Mustangs take off into cold morning air. Each aircraft carries 1,100 pounds of external fuel. The silver tanks gleam. 328 B-17 Flying Fortresses join the formation. The largest American bomber force ever sent to Berlin, and for the first time, they will have fighter protection all the way there, all the way back. The flight to Berlin takes 2.5 hours. Every pilot watches his fuel gauges with religious attention. Gentile monitors his obsessively. The needles fall steadily. The math has to work. The engineering has to be perfect. There's no room for error at this distance. They cross the Dutch coast, past where the P-47 seconds used to turn back, past where the killing zone used to begin. They keep going. Over Berlin, the Luftwaffe rises to defend the capital. Everything they have. Everything they can get airborne. Messerschmitt 109 seconds. Focke-Wulf 190 seconds. Even a few Me-262 jets, the new wonder weapons, faster than anything the Allies have. The Mustangs jettison their drop tanks. 300 gallons of fuel, empty now, tumble away toward German soil. The fighters engage. Gentile shoots down 2 Me-109 seconds. His squadron mates claim 8 more. The sky over Berlin fills with contrails and tracers. But Gentile is watching his fuel gauge. Internal tanks only now. Every minute of combat burns gas he needs for the flight home. After 15 minutes, all flights disengage. We're going home. It takes discipline to break off combat, to turn away while German fighters are still in the sky. But discipline is survival at this range. The flight back is tense in a different way. No combat, just math, just physics, just fuel consumption versus distance remaining. They cross the Dutch coast. Fuel gauges reading yellow. They cross the English Channel. Warning lights illuminating in cockpits. Gentile lands at Debden with 12 gallons remaining. 4 minutes of fuel. 4 minutes between landing safely and ditching in the Channel. But he made it. Every fighter that flew to Berlin returned. Every pilot who took off came home. The mission everyone said was impossible had just become routine. And it was made possible by technology that had existed since 1923. Finally authorized. Finally used. Finally allowed to save lives. Let's do the math that haunts military historians. The math that should haunt anyone who's ever said no to a solution because it challenged doctrine. March 5th, 1923. Drop tanks first used successfully by United States Army Air Service. Technology proven. Concept validated. Range doubled. December 1943. Drop tanks finally authorized for US fighters in the European theater. 20 years, 9 months, 2 decades of proven technology sitting unused. But let's focus on the European theater specifically. The killing zone. The Bomber War. August 1942. First, major unescorted losses over Europe. The problem becomes undeniable. December 1943. Drop tanks finally authorized. 16 months of bureaucratic delay. 16 months from when the problem was obvious to when the solution was implemented. In those 16 months, American aircrew killed or captured 25,000. Heavy bombers destroyed 2,500. Missions flown into the killing zone. Hundreds. Days when men died while the solution sat in warehouses. 487. Now let's look at what happened after December 1943. Loss rate before drop tanks, 8 to 10% per mission. Loss rate after drop tanks, 2 to 3% per mission. That means for every 100 bombers on a mission, 60 to 80 more men survive. 60 to 80 men per 100 bombers. Over thousands of missions, tens of thousands of additional lives saved. Not through better aircraft, not through improved tactics, not through superior skill, through permission to use technology that had existed for 20 years. So here's the question we have to ask. The question that has no good answer. What if drop tanks had been authorized in August 1942 instead of December 1943? What if Kelsey's request in November 1941 had been approved? What if General Arnold's 1939 memo had never been written? How many of those 25,000 men would have come home? How many would have finished their tours? How many would have seen their children born? How many would have grown old? We'll never know. We can calculate the statistics. We can run the numbers. We can show that 60 to 80 more men per 100 survived after drop tanks were authorized, but we cannot bring back the ones who died before someone finally said yes. 25,000 men. Not lost to superior enemy technology. Not lost to bad luck or poor skill. Lost to doctrine. Lost to bureaucracy. Lost because somewhere, someone kept saying no when the answer should have been yes. The deadliest words in military history. Not spoken by enemies. Spoken by commanders who believed their theory was more important than the lives they were sworn to protect. We cannot bring them back, but we can remember what killed them. And we can ask, where are we saying no today? What lives? Are we losing to doctrine? What permission are we denying? Behind every statistic is a story. Behind every number is a name, a face, a life that mattered to someone. Staff Sergeant Joseph Connolly, waist gunner, 91st Bomb Group, 22 years old when he arrived in England. He flew 35 missions, survived them all, went home. Years later, he wrote about the difference drop tanks made. For my first 10 missions, we were on our own after crossing into Germany. German fighters attacked constantly. Every mission, we lost aircraft. Every mission, friends didn't come back. For my last 25 missions, we had fighter escort the entire way. We still encountered Germans, still saw combat, but our fighters drove them off, protected us. I probably wouldn't have survived to mission 35 without those escorts. I probably wouldn't have come home, wouldn't have met my wife, wouldn't have had my children. Joseph Connolly died in 2003, age 82, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, a full life. A life that almost ended over Germany in 1943, a life saved by technology from 1923, finally authorized in 1943. But this story has another side, another cost. Major Egon Meyer, Luftwaffe ace, 102 victories, brilliant tactician who developed the head-on attack against B-17 formations, survived 3 years of combat over Europe, shot down dozens of Allied aircraft, decorated, respected, experienced, killed by P-47 Thunderbolt fighters over Germany, March 2nd, 1944, 2 months after drop tanks were authorized. The American fighters that killed him could reach that deep into Germany only because of those tanks, could stay long enough to catch him, could hunt him over his own territory. Hauptmann Hans Philipp, 206 victories, one of the highest scoring aces of the war, killed by P-51 Mustangs. October 1943, Major Helmut Wick, 56 victory, killed. Oberleutnant Joachim Müncheberg, 135 victories, killed. Major Wilhelm Balthasar, 47 victories, killed. German aces with hundreds of combined victories, men who'd survived years of combat, who knew every trick, every tactic, falling to American fighters who could finally reach them. The Luftwaffe's loss wasn't just aircraft. You can build a new Messerschmitt in 6 weeks. The factories, even under bombing, kept producing them. But you cannot build a new ace in 6 weeks. You cannot replace years of combat experience. You cannot replace the institutional knowledge of men who'd flown hundreds of missions. By late 1944, average German pilot training had dropped from 250 hours to 60 hours. Boys with barely enough training to take off and land were being thrown against American veterans. The result was predictable, inevitable, tragic. Loss ratios climbed from 2 to 1 to 6 to 1 to 10 to 1. Young German pilots died by the hundreds, not because they lacked courage, because they lacked time, training, experience, things their predecessors had. Things that American fighters finally equipped with drop tanks had systematically destroyed. This is what happens when doctrine finally breaks. When reality forces change. It saves some lives. It costs others. Joseph Connolly went home because American fighters could finally protect him. Egon Meyer didn't go home because American fighters could finally reach him. Both men caught in the machinery of war, both affected by the same technology. Both lives shaped by the word permission. One more piece of this story deserves recognition. By early 1944, the drop tank program faced a new problem. Not authorization that battle was won. Not design. The engineering was proven. Production. The Allies needed drop tanks by the thousands. Every fighter mission required them. Every aircraft needed at least one, often two. Demand. 1,500 tanks per week. But aluminum was scarce. Rationed. Desperately needed for aircraft fuselage, wings, engines. Steel was worse. Every ounce went to ships, tanks, guns. Manufacturing metal drop tanks was slow, expensive, and consumed resources the Allies couldn't spare. Enter British ingenuity. Engineers at the Royal Aircraft Establishment faced the problem with characteristic practicality. If you can't use metal, use something else. Their solution? Craft paper, impregnated with resorcinol glue. Paper, drop tanks, made of paper. The concept sounds absurd. Paper holding high-octane aviation fuel at 30,000 feet? At temperatures 50 degrees below zero? At speeds over 300 miles per hour? But the engineering was sound, brilliant even. Multiple layers of craft paper, laminated together with resorcinol glue, a waterproof adhesive that could handle extreme temperatures. The paper was wrapped around wooden forms, pressed, shaped, reinforced at stress points. The result, a drop tank that weighed half as much as aluminum, cost $18 to manufacture instead of 80, could be produced 5 times faster. There was one limitation. The resorcinol glue would slowly dissolve when exposed to aviation fuel. The paper would become saturated, develop leaks. Timeline: 6 to 8 hours after filling. So paper tanks were filled immediately before takeoff, used once, jettisoned over enemy territory whether empty or full. Reusable? No. Practical? Absolutely. By summer 1944, British factories were producing over 13,000 paper drop tanks. Assembly line work, done mostly by women the men were fighting. Each tank, $18. AP-50, one Mustang, $50,000. AB-17 Flying Fortress, $240,000. A trained pilot, priceless. Losing an $18 paper tank to save a $50,000 fighter? Obvious choice. Losing $18 to save a pilot's life? No choice at all. Bonus consideration. When dropped over Germany, paper tanks didn't give the enemy scrap metal to feed their war machine. Aluminum tanks? Germans collected them, melted them down, turned them into parts for their own aircraft. Paper tanks? Burned them for warmth, or left them rotting in fields. Useless to German industry. Sometimes the best military technology isn't the most advanced. Sometimes it's the most practical. The paper tank couldn't be reused, couldn't be repaired, couldn't hold fuel for more than 8 hours. But it could be made by the thousands with materials nobody else needed, could be manufactured by workers who didn't require specialized training, could be shipped, stored, and deployed without consuming critical war resources. It did exactly what was needed, nothing more, nothing less. High tech loses to appropriate tech. The lesson applies beyond warfare. 13,000 paper tanks manufactured, 13,000 missions extended, 13,000 times a pilot had enough fuel to get home, all because British engineers asked, "What if we use paper?" And someone said, "Yes." So what about Benjamin Kelsey, the man this story is often told about? The mechanic with a crazy idea who supposedly invented drop tanks in a hangar with scrap metal? Here's the truth. Brigadier General Benjamin Scoville Kelsey. Not a mechanic. Not a sergeant. Not some enlisted man tinkering after hours. Bachelor of Science. Mechanical Engineering. MIT. 1928. Master of Science. Aeronautical Engineering. MIT. 1931. Commissioned Officer. U.S. Army Air Corps. 1929. Test Pilot. Fighter Project Officer at Wright Field. The man responsible for evaluating and specifying requirements for every pursuit aircraft in the American infantry. He didn't invent drop tanks. The technology was 40 years old when he started advocating for it, but his contribution was equally important, perhaps more important. As Fighter Project Officer, Kelsey spent years fighting for drop tank authorization. In 1941, he contacted Lockheed to design drop tanks for the P-38 Lightning. Request denied by headquarters. He included drop tank mounting provisions in P-38 specifications anyway, worked around the prohibition by making the fittings multi-purpose hardpoints. He wrote reports, submitted proposals, cited the 1923 tests, pointed to German and Japanese success, denied. Again and again. He wasn't alone. Kelly Johnson at Lockheed wanted drop tanks from day one. Republic aviation engineers included the fittings in P-47 designs. Pilots in England begged for extended range. But Kelsey had the position, the credentials, the authority to make the institutional case. And he never stopped making it. When asked about drop tanks in the 1970s, Kelsey was characteristically modest. "I didn't invent them. The technology was old. Proven. My contribution was persistent advocacy against institutional resistance. Someone had to keep pushing." He retired as Brigadier General. Received the Distinguished Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, the Distinguished Flying Cross. Became Jerome C. Hunsaker, visiting professor of aerospace systems at MIT, his alma mater recognizing his contributions. Served on the committee that approved and funded the X-15 rocket plane. Wrote extensively about military aviation development and the dangers of institutional inertia. He died in 1981, age 74, at his home in Virginia. His obituary in the New York Times mentioned his World War II service, but barely referenced drop tanks. Most people never knew his name. The real story expert fighting bureaucracy, engineer advocating against doctrine,
This junction
officer
here is
pushing
critical.
for change despite
If the
institutional
alloy
resistance,
fails at this
is actually
temperature,
more
the
interesting
entire
than the
wing
myth.
structure
The
is
myth.
compromised.
Scrappy mechanic
We need
invents
absolute
revolutionary
precision.
technology, proves experts wrong. The reality. Expert engineer advocates for proven technology, fights institutional resistance, finally succeeds through persistence. Both are heroic, just
If you
differently.
examine the
myth
structural weak
celebrates
point
individual
at grid
genius
reference
against
4B,
establishment ignorance.
the entire bridge is
reality
vulnerable.
Celebrates
We must
institutional
attack
courage.
there.
The harder. Fight. Fighting your own side. Fighting policy, doctrine, and bureaucratic inertia. Fighting for what's right when your own institution says no. Benjamin Kelsey didn't invent drop tanks. He did something harder. He convinced the institution to use them. That took 2 years of fighting his own command structure. That took persistence against rejection after rejection. That took believing in the solution, even when everyone above him said no. Not a mechanic with a crazy idea. An engineer with the courage to fight doctrine. That's still heroic. Maybe more heroic. The lesson isn't anyone can change the world. The lesson is experts must fight for what's right, even against their own institutions. sometimes especially against their own institutions. So what was the real innovation? Not the drop tanks, those were from 1923. Not the P-51 Mustang that was designed in 1940. Not even the tactical implementation fighters escorting bombers was obvious. The real innovation was institutional. December 1943 marks the moment when combat reality finally overrode doctrinal theory. When the bomber will always get through met 60 bombers shot down in one day. When theory met evidence, and doctrine blinked first. For years, the bomber mafia had built their careers on a theory. Brilliant men, decorated officers, patriots who genuinely believed strategic bombing could win wars. They believed bombers could defend themselves. They believed fighter escorts were unnecessary. They believed so strongly that they prohibited the technology that would prove them wrong. May 16th, 1939, use of drop tanks prohibited, not because they didn't work, because using them meant admitting the doctrine was wrong. October 14th, 1943, 60 bombers lost, 600 men dead. Reality delivered its verdict. December 1943. Fighter groups are authorized to use external fuel tanks. Doctrine changed, not because new technology was invented, because the cost of being wrong became unbearable. The innovation wasn't technical. It was the institutional willingness to say, we were wrong, change the policy. General Ira Eaker, the same man who'd commanded during the Prohibition, made the call to authorize drop tanks after Black Thursday. The same officer who defended bomber doctrine changed the policy when evidence demanded it. That's not weakness. That's leadership. Admitting you're wrong, especially when lives are at stake, when your career was built on the theory you're abandoning, when subordinates are watching, takes more courage than being right. Today, military historians study this period, not as a failure of engineering, but as a case study in institutional adaptation, or rather, institutional failure to adapt. How many good ideas are blocked by policy right now? How many lives are lost too? We've always done it this way. How many innovations sit unused, waiting for permission? How many modern Kelseys are fighting their own institutions? How many modern drop tanks exist, proven, available, prohibited? This isn't ancient history. This isn't a World War II story with no modern relevance. This is happening now, in militaries, in corporations, in governments, in every large institution that has policies, procedures, doctrines, the medical treatment that works but isn't approved, the teaching method that succeeds but isn't authorized, the manufacturing process that's more efficient but not how we do things, the solution that everyone knows works but nobody has permission to implement. Different fields, different technologies, different institutions, same problem. Doctrine over evidence. Same solution. Institutional courage. Change. Same question. How many people die while we wait for permission? 25,000 airmen died, waiting for authorization to use technology from 1923. How many are dying today? The next time you hear that's not policy, ask why. The next time you hear we've evaluated that, ask when. The next time you hear we can't do that, ask why not. Because sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't across the battlefield. It's the policy manual. It's the doctrine that refuses to adapt. It's the institution that says no when the evidence says yes. Real innovation isn't inventing new solutions. It's implementing the ones we already have. March 4th, 1944, 1600 hours. Late afternoon sun stretches shadows across the runway at Deadpool. Captain Don Gentile cuts his engine. The Merlin's roar fades to ticking metal cooling in English air. He sits in the cockpit for a long moment. Hands still gripping the stick. Eyes still watching gauges that no longer matter now that he's on the ground. He just flew to Berlin and back, 600 miles each way. 1,200 miles total. The mission, everyone said, was impossible. The mission that would have been impossible 6 months ago. He climbs out, walks around his aircraft, stops at the wing hardpoints where the drop tank used to hang, empty now, jettisoned over Germany when combat began. His crew chief approaches. Fuel state, Captain. 12 gallons when I landed. Maybe 4 minutes of flight time left. The crew chief whistles, cutting it. Close. Gentile looks at him. But we made it. All of us. Every fighter that flew to Berlin came home. 12 gallons. 4 minutes. The absolute edge of what's possible. But possible nonetheless. Made possible by technology from 1923. Technology that sat unused for 20 years. Technology that was prohibited when Gentile first arrived in England. Technology that was authorized only after 25,000 men died without it. Across the airfield, other pilots climb from their cockpits. Other crew chiefs check their aircraft. Other fighters sit with empty mounting brackets. The mission to Berlin impossible in October 1943 has become routine in March 1944. This is not a story about invention. This is not about engineering, genius, or technological breakthrough. This is a story about permission, about the deadly cost of institutional resistance, about the danger of doctrine over evidence, about the price of saying no when the answer should be yes, about how bureaucracy kills more efficiently than bullets. The next time you hear that's not how we do things, ask why. The next time you hear the policy doesn't allow it, ask who made that policy, and when, and whether it still makes sense. The next time you hear, we've evaluated that, and it doesn't work, ask when they evaluated it, and whether circumstances have changed. And most importantly, ask this: is this policy costing lives? Because sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one across the battlefield. Sometimes it's the doctrine that refuses to adapt. Sometimes it's the institution that values theory over evidence. Sometimes it's the word no, when the answer should be yes. 25,000 American airmen learned that lesson in the hardest possible way. Staff Sergeant Joseph Miller, age 19. Lieutenant Robert Patterson, age 23. Technical Sergeant James O'Brien, age 21. Men who died between August 1942 and December 1943. Men who died in the 16-month gap between when the problem was obvious and when the solution was authorized. Men who died not to enemy action, but to institutional inertia. We cannot bring them back, but we can remember what killed them, and we can ask ourselves, where are we saying no today? What lives are being lost to doctrine? What solutions are waiting for permission? What modern drop tanks exist, proven, available, prohibited? March 4th, 1944. American fighters flew to Berlin and returned. Technology from 1923, finally used in 1944. 20 years and 25,000 lives between question and answer, between problem and solution, between can we and you may. The deadliest word in military history isn't attack. It's no. In memory of the 25,000 American airmen who died waiting for permission to use technology that already existed, August 1942, December 1943.